Welcome to the TSD Mindfulness video for teaching number 18. So this is the last of the 4 teachings on how to tame the mental field. And this particular teaching is recognize patterns of relationship between the mental, gut, and heart fields. Recognize patterns of relationship between the mental, gut, and heart fields. So before I go into this, I want to do a little bit of a review of the temperamental body. So as you learned in some of the previous videos, the temperamental body is made up of our mental field, which is essentially our thinking, and our gut field, which is essentially our nervous system, our fight or flight responses, for example. And the temperamental body is also made up of our heart field, which is those deep emotions of gratitude, love, rejection, abandonment, all of those really deep emotions. And so this teaching has to do with taking a look at how these fields interact with each other. How does the mental field interact with the gut field? How does the gut field interact with the heart field? Because that's what's happening in the temperamental body is these fields are interacting with one another. And this is really important to understand if you have anxiety. So your anxiety can be understood by looking at how these fields are interacting. You notice your anxiety gets worse, it gets intense, your anxiety goes down a little bit. That is all related to how these fields of the temperamental body are interacting. So let's talk a little bit about those interactions. So how does the gut field interact with our mental field? For example, or more specifically, what I'm saying here is how does our gut field kind of aggravate or intensify or instigate your mental field? So how could something in your gut field really instigate something going on in your mental field? And your gut field really being connected to your nervous system, to those fight or flight, freeze or fawn responses. So you can think about for a moment, what might going into fight or flight do to your mental field, basically? And one of the answers is it can cause you to have anxious thoughts, right? This is just our biology. It's just how we are designed. Our nervous system gets triggered, and then we start thinking thoughts that on a very fundamental core level are to get us to safety. But those triggers can be emotional, right? We can feel emotionally unsafe. Our ego can feel unsafe. So we're not just talking about physical safety. So these thoughts might be about how to get emotionally safe or how to get our ego back to safety. So some examples might be if you're in fight or flight, triggered because someone's questioned something about your integrity, who you are, accused you of maybe not being honest, something like that, then example thought might be blame, maybe going to blaming the other person, because that keeps our emotional reality experience safer if we blame someone else. So this is the mindfulness part, is watching all of this happening. It can be really helpful to soothing yourself eventually, because once you're seeing it happening and then you understand that it doesn't need to happen, that you could move into some other emotions that might be more settling or more deeper and more real. So that would be an example of how your gut field affects your mental field. How does your mental field affect your gut field? Meaning, what might your mental field do that would trigger you into fight or flight? Can you begin to start thinking something and then go into fight or flight? This happens. It's maybe not as common as maybe somebody else does something and then you go into fight or flight, but you can cause your own self to go into fight or flight. You can. And an example of this might be your mental field making plans to go on a certain trip, or making plans to roll out a certain marketing campaign for your company, something like that. It's like these big plans that are going to happen. And that can actually trigger your gut field. Your gut field can feel like there's going to be some emotional unsafety, that if this plan is executed, then I'm going to feel insecure. I'm going to feel overwhelmed. And you might go into fight or flight because you feel like there's a threat to your emotional stability. So that's an example of how your mental field can actually trigger your gut field. How does your mental field affect your heart field? So does your own thinking do something to affect the experience that's going on in your heart? And the experience that's going on in your heart is usually some joy. There might be joy in your heart. What can go on in our mind that's going to damper our experience of joy? You might be feeling a very deep experience, emotion of abandonment. What might your mental field, your thinking, do to affect that deep emotional experience of abandonment? Your mental field, what you think, can also affect your healing process, as emotional healing happens in our heart. And sometimes our own thinking can shut that process down. So what might be an example of that? So let's say we have a feeling of betrayal. A feeling of betrayal comes up in our hearts, and then our mind, our mental field, doesn't want to experience that, doesn't want to be emotional, doesn't want to feel the pain. Betrayal can be very painful. So the mental field might kind of just shut it down, just literally shut the emotion down. That's the easiest way to explain it, is that your own thinking can do that. It might be an actual thought. It might be, oh, I should be stronger. I shouldn't be feeling this. I'm better than this. I don't need to waste my time with this. Might be a literal thought that would shut that emotion down. I think some of the thinking or what's going on in the mental field can be a little bit more subconscious, or maybe you're not aware of it as much, but it's the same idea, but on a more unconscious, maybe nonverbal level that shuts your emotion down. How does the heart field affect the mental field? So how could something going on in the heart actually change what's going on in the mental field? And it's kind of the same scenario, but you are feeling a deep emotion in the heart, and then your mental field, it might cause your mental field to go into protection mode. Like, I need to protect myself. I might protect myself by blaming somebody else. I might protect myself by having resentment. It might even be shame. It might even be, and I know that sounds weird that going to shame is protective, but it actually, in this psychological world, in our psyche, we think that shame will protect us, because we think if we put pressure on ourselves, we put ourselves down, that we will do better next time, and so therefore we will protect ourselves. So those are some of the ways that something going on in the heart could affect what's going on in your mental field, your thinking. So these interactions pose problems. They do. They can really exacerbate our emotional experience. For example, that's another way that the mental field can affect what's going on in the heart field. The mental field can have some thinking that actually makes the pain bigger than it really is. You might have some pain in your heart, but then your thinking makes it bigger. So that can be a problem that can cause not only emotional pain, but anxiety. There's, if your gut is triggered, and then it's triggering all these really anxious thoughts, then that's a problem. And your anxious thoughts can actually then trigger your nervous system more. It can be like this ricochet what the word would be, escalation. You're actually like escalating your anxiety. So there is issues with this. So one of the biggest things that we can get out of our TSD mindfulness practice is learning how to minimize that interaction. We actually want to isolate these experiences. We want to just have the thinking be the thinking. We just want to have the nervous system trigger be the fight or flight response. We just want to have the heart emotion be the heart emotion and not cause all these interactions. So that's what this mindfulness practice, that the meditation that I'm teaching you to do is setting up you to do, is to be able to experience these in isolation. And once you start doing that, once you start just having your thoughts be your thoughts and your triggers be your fight or flight triggers just be your fight or flight triggers, and your deep emotions just be your deep emotions, then it's a calming. Takes your anxiety down a certain level. It's not going to take it all the way down, just that simple technique of isolating, but it is going to reduce it quite a bit. And then there's other techniques that are going to then reduce that more. But that isolation is really important. And one of the reasons it's important is because, like I've said, you can't truly have your consciousness be in your heart if there's all this stuff going on in your thinking, or you're in fight or flight. It's really hard to just really simply be there in your heart. So that's another reason why being mindful of these interactions is important. And if we can't just simply be in our heart, then we're not able to heal. We're not able to experience that emotional healing until we really quiet our mental field, or at least not let what's going on in the mental field overpower what's going on in our heart. And we're not able to go into healing if our nervous system is triggered. So it's really important for us to soothe those. So there are a few examples of when this relationship between the fields of the temperamental body is helpful. I'm not saying that it's never helpful, but often it is what it's doing is it's making your anxiety worse. But the few situations in which it is helpful is if your gut triggers thoughts about getting to safety, if you're in the middle of the road and there's a car coming. So if you're in the middle of the road and then your nervous system is triggered and then you have a thought, run, get out of the road, then that, of course, is helpful, right? You want that interaction. Another example of this interaction being really good is when we're sitting with these emotions, these deep emotions in the heart, and we're moving into a healing experience. It actually changes the logic, some of the logic in our thinking. So we have this conditional thinking. If someone is in this situation, then this should happen. Or if someone is doing this, then they shouldn't do this. We have this conditional logic. And if we go through emotional healing, some of that emotional logic heals as well. And so that's a way that we can change that type of thinking and that logic. And one more example of why this might be helpful for this interaction is, say you're constructing this really crazy plan in your head, like, oh, I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this and I'm going to open this company and I'm going to do, just starts making these like really plans that are probably not that good. Then your gut gets triggered. And so it's like, oh, let me put the brakes on and maybe I need to take a breath here and think about what I'm doing. So there are some benefits. So that's what's niceful, to use your mindfulness to really see this process happening and for you to make a judgment of whether that interaction was helpful or maybe it wasn't as helpful. So before I conclude this video, I do want to share the emotional clusters with you, because being aware of your emotional experience can actually be really helpful to taming your mental experience, because a lot of times our emotions are creating all of this thinking. So the reason naming your emotion can be helpful is it's just you simply name your emotion, you sit with it, and see if you can sit with it without all the thinking attached. So I'll share the emotional clusters. And if you are in the TSD Mindfulness program, one of the programs, you do have access to these clusters. So this first page are the mental emotions. So they are emotions that have that conditional thinking intertwined with them. For example, anger, we are angry because we believe a person in this situation should not do this. So it's an emotion, but it's also a belief. It's combined. So that's the mental emotions on the first page. The second page are the emotions that are associated with our fight, flight, freeze responses. So if you're feeling a lot of these emotions, then it's a good chance that your nervous system is triggered. And then this third page are the deep heart emotions. Yeah, these are real. They're often linked to past trauma, and sitting with them and creating space for them and giving yourself compassion while you're feeling these emotions is what leads to emotional healing. When I keep referring to emotional healing, I'm talking about you experiencing these emotions in a very healthy, healing way. And the mental emotions on the first page, those are the superficial emotions, and there's always a deeper emotion underneath. There'd be one of these emotions underneath your anger, underneath your frustration, for example. So this concludes the TSD mindfulness video for teaching number 18.